Welcome to a special 5-part Brave Feminine Leadership series where we dive into learning about ADHD. I'm joined by 5 successful female leaders who all have diagnosed ADHD. I'm deeply curious to understand their stories and learn both how they've learned to thrive in a neurotypical world and how, as leaders, we can keep building cultures where everyone belongs and everyone reaches their highest potential. Today, I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by Dr. Oli Sophie Meredith. Oli, welcome.
Thank you, Melissa. Thanks for having me on.
Brilliant to have you here. Let me share with our audience, for the people that haven't had the pleasure of meeting you before, let me just give them a little bit of information about you and then we'll get going on our conversation. So Dr. Oli Sophie Meredith is an autistic and ADHD non-binary woman, originally from England, living on Ngunnawal land. She's a public health academic at Charles Sturt University, currently leading a cross-institutional project entitled Hiding or Thriving: The Lived Experiences and Coping Strategies of Women and Gender Diverse People with ADHD. Fascinating, Oli. Oli is also a poet, a Reiki master and yogi, and is a big advocate for bringing all of who you are into wherever you are, the gnarly bits and all, and she never wants to retire. So I'm joining you from East Kulin Nation, and I never want to retire either. How exciting is that?
That's very cool.
So let's share with the audience, Oli, who are you as a human being? How do you answer that question?
It's a massive question. I think one of the things that's integral to my life is about health and well-being. And ironically, but not ironically, and I'm sure a lot of people listening would agree, that's connected to lots of experiences of not being well as well. And that's sort of sparked my interest in health and well-being. And it's been a long journey for me through various illnesses and learning lots of things like Reiki and yoga, but also eventually becoming a public health academic to help people and to I sort of sense into a different way of being. And those ways are all there. But I think just the mainstream perhaps is sort of going in a different direction sometimes. I'm also a mum, got 2 gorgeous kids, and I love everything about that. Well, that's a bit of a lie, isn't it? It's often hard. I love everything about that. No, I don't. I did not this morning getting them to school. But yeah, I do. It's a big part of who I am, probably. Yeah, I love physical activity, movement, dance, music, and I guess my big thing in life is about trying to follow your passion. And sometimes I fail at that and don't do that. But things tend to go awry when I'm pushing things that aren't really from the heart. So yeah, that's a nice synopsis of who I am.
That is a lovely synopsis of who you are. So let's step through. So originally from the UK, how did the journey, let's step through that journey. You alluded to a few things in there about health along the way and those things. So let's navigate that. And also I love the honesty straight off the bat with the kids. So to all of our kids listening, we really do love you. But gosh, there's some moments, aren't there?
Yeah, there certainly are. Yeah.
So
for them too.
Them too, exactly. So back to the UK and or you tell us your story.
Yeah, so I went to university, did arts degrees, masters at University of London, grew up in Stratford upon Avon. And I remember when I was at university studying political ideology, I was really interested in Darwin and Darwinism and all sorts of aspects to do that. But I remember Darwin actually saying himself, which seems so obvious to me that wasn't true, that somehow because all his bookshelves were lined with the male authors, that was sort of evidence for their superior intelligence. And that's not so long ago. And I kind of found that hilarious. And also it just made me start to think about just those structural inequalities that were so ingrained that people really started to take that for granted and believed that. And I moved to Cambodia at some point and worked in conflict transformation. And I unfortunately got very ill. I got dengue fever and then I got this thing called chronic fatigue syndrome, which some people have heard of, but some people just dismiss.
Yeah.
But that went around for about 6 years for me. And that was while I was in Cambodia. It's very difficult to work and operate. And I discovered over time that a lot of women had got this, men and women. It affects women more than men. But dentists, athletes, I've had friends who were all kinds of level of society, hardworking people who were just dismissed and put to one side, or they just weren't answers, but it wasn't put as a priority. And I became a yoga teacher then whilst doing that in Cambodia. I trained in Cairns. That's the first time I came to Australia. I came over to do that because I wanted to learn for myself more about the body. Like I was very much a thinking person and not a being person so much. And that was a big change for me. But I wanted to be able to do more. The more I read and learned, I wanted to be able to make a change. So then I went from the arts to doing a PhD in public health in Australia, which, was like learning about statistics and things I hadn't done before. But I wanted to be able to have this clout, I suppose, to sort of to learn about, hear and share women's and gender diverse and everyone's, but voices, people who haven't been listened to in health and wellbeing, especially. And so that's where I've come to, and that's most of my research. I'm in a research project for regional women's health, a RAW group, which is called RAW, the group, which is fantastic. I do research on how women are involved in physical activity and sport and the barriers to involvement in sport. And my project that I'm really interested in at the moment is around ADHD and women's involvement in self-care, I suppose, not involvement, their self-care and their coping strategies for ADHD.
So many things you've said there that I want to pick up. I mean, I just think about most of our audience are probably going to be in that thinking headspace, and not so much in the being headspace. But you obviously, you healed along the way. You then went and did your public health and your PhD and all sorts of different things in that regard. Why are what's your perspective on why women's illnesses have been dismissed or treated as, why did it take so long for things like chronic fatigue and that to...
Look, I think that's a lot to do with the head to start with. So I can go down the gendered aspect, and there's some obvious reasons for that. But there are some broader things as well with that when we don't see something, we need evidence for things. Right. Just as a basic idea, I think. If someone says they've got cancer, it's clear and we know how we can deal with it. So I think there's a lot of things that may involve the mind as well, that may start, there's a lot to do with the amygdala potentially for why, we don't know for sure, but there's I think that's one reason, like people just, if they can't see it, they don't know the cure, then they don't want to know about it. But I don't necessarily think that's true for women. I think what's interesting and something to be celebrated is that because there aren't necessarily pharmaceutical responses, women actually, and sadly often unsuccessfully, and I know there's so many people out there who have got lifelong chronic fatigue syndrome, and I'm one of the lucky ones, so I just acknowledge that. But a lot of women will go and pursue other avenues for self-care and sometimes become well and actually find the connection between mind and body, and that and sometimes this isn't possible for people, but the lifestyles they've been living or the pressure they've been under and the stress they've been under, it's never going to heal if they carry on in that way. I think, I think there's probably a gendered thing as well, that women just need to suck things up. I think perhaps we have had historically that in society. It becomes high profile when it's noticed for men, but I say that knowing that as well, we dismiss a lot of things for men as well, like mental health, and I really love that has become a focus. So I've really changed how I think about that over the last. I would have had a different answer for you. Yes. Maybe more cynical, gendered kind of simplistic response in the past, but I don't think that's necessarily true. I think women are actually much better at going and seeking help with psychologists, and I think people just don't have the answers. I do think a gendered aspect or an answer is, though, that we do go to these frontline medical responses hoping for the solutions quite quickly, and actually there have been maybe women's intuitive practices that have been suppressed over hundreds of years, and not women's, First Nations responses. We're very dismissive about complementary alternative medicine from other nations and other cultures, or I say other, cognizant, of course, all the cultures are Australian and Indigenous cultures, but naturally, perhaps that's time for those things to our understanding of those things to broaden a little bit. Some things that maybe seem intuitive, we talk about things like old wives' tales, and again, what I love in my position is that I do get to tap into science, and for me, it's bringing those two things together. And so, yes, you don't want the wild things that haven't been tested or understood on one level, but I think there is much more room for tapping in intuitively to what's going on in your body, rather than saying oh no, I'm in pain, which happens a lot sometimes for me at night. I have fibromyalgia, comes and goes. Just actually going, what's my body telling me, rather than popping a pill. And I still might pop a pill sometimes, but once after I've asked, what are you saying? And I think that to a lot of people that would sound a bit woo-woo. But I think I don't know if you've come across this, Melissa, as well. When you do get a serious illness, that's when you actually start to listen.
Yes.
You're forced to, and then you actually do hear your body talk.
That was my journey. I think when you and I first connected, I shared that with regards to breast cancer. So, and that was where I picked up earlier when you spoke about that shift from kind of doing to being, from in your head to in your body.
Yes,
exactly. So super powerful.
Yeah.
So, Oli, take me back. When did you get your diagnosis?
Look, I think it was about a year and a half ago. I'd known for quite a long time. I think I'd heard Hannah Gadsby talking about like her diagnosis, and it was like, I don't know, that must have been 5 or 6 years ago. And I was on a bus somewhere, and I remember her talking about it and saying the relief she felt. She described all these symptoms, and I just burst into tears. And it was just revelatory. And it didn't matter in that moment about diagnosis or not diagnosis. It was like, it explains everything. And I think sometimes until you have someone else, and that's leadership as well, until you have someone else share their experience, you're not aware of your experience. You're so busy with the mask that you are the mask. You're so busy holding that mask that you are in. I really was that mask.
What did she say, Oli? What did she say that, like, what were the things that you heard her say that really resonated?
To be honest, it's a long time ago, so I can't actually remember, but I imagine it.
That's okay. Keep going.
Yeah, I imagine it would have been about not fitting in, but having a mask in the first place. And there's so many things about forgetfulness and trying to do things in a linear way, and the exhaustion. I think the exhaustion that it takes to be neurodiverse. And I always remember her talking about like queer people as well being expected to be dancing on the streets, and I do love that celebration, but actually what she wanted really was just quiet time and a cup of tea. And I've got two sides of me. I've got a very much ADHD side and an autistic side, and not that they're quite linear like that either, but I can be both, which I'm sure will resonate with a lot of people. Sometimes I'm quite introvert, sometimes very extrovert. But she was just real, and she was just I can't actually remember, to be honest, but the pressures to be neurotypical, to remember things a certain way, to do anything that you're not passionate about, the struggle that takes. Yes. And how people, again, we've gone from Hannah Gadsby now, but now I'm talking about my experience, how people sort of feel like you've let them down, and take it personally when you've forgotten something, or you've missed a detail, and the dread you feel when that comes, because you really love someone, or you really care about your work situation, and it's not negligence, it's just overwhelm.